This time not from the EPR Creation Studio, but rather from the road, since I've been on the road for a while. I had a research trip to make this week. Been working on a new project and trying to get that pretty far along, but still need to get some stuff recorded. Wasn't able to do a full film review session this week, but was able to go back over some things more closely. This is Unconquered with Doc Staples. As always, I'm Doc Staples. And the audio obviously won't sound exactly the same as usual, so pardon any differences from the usual higher quality setup, but we're going to do the best we can on the road here. Also, I should note, I've had some Spotify folks, some folks who listen on Spotify let me know that there have been some times where, for whatever reason, the feed, when it's coming into Spotify, sometimes there's a hiccup and it winds up going into a monster voice or whatever as it tries to layer multiple things over it. I'm not sure exactly why that's happening. I've got to investigate that with Spotify and with my host as well on this and try to get to the bottom of why that's happening and see if we can get it fixed. If that does happen to you, then I suggest re-downloading it and seeing if that improves things, but that's about as much as we can do on that for right now because it's not in my hands to fix. All right. As always, this podcast brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet marketing and website development for an affordable price. By Louis Marquez of Keller Williams Realty in Jacksonville, Florida. Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina. Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida. And by Justin Galloway from Benchmark Mortgage. Get in touch with these folks if you can use their services. Information's all in the show notes. Look, if they're advertising on the Unconquered podcast, first of all, let them know you heard about them from here. But you can trust that these good folks are going to get you the absolute best. They're going to give you their absolute best. I wouldn't stand behind them if I didn't think that. All right, let's get to it. And actually, what I'm doing on this, I didn't think when I was going through that there was honestly a whole lot to revise in terms of the takeaways from the Virginia Tech game. So I'm not going to spend too much time on second thoughts on that game because there's just not a whole lot to rethink. I think by and large it was what it looked to be the first time through, and that was a Florida State team that had an overwhelming talent advantage and a Virginia Tech team that kept things a little closer than it should have been through that game. There were a few just hiccups from Florida State at different points. And also some calls that went against FSU a couple times that helped extend a drive, that prevented another drive from extending, and then another drive from extending for Florida State. So helped keep things a little bit closer in that point, or at that point in the game. And then basically FSU being able to block Virginia Tech up front a lot better than they've been able to handle some of the recent opponents was the biggest factor. I do still have some concerns, but we'll get to those in the mailbag. I just went through and curated some of those questions, so I know what we're going to get to. So that's really what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and get to the mailbag, and we'll go ahead and start in just a moment. Got to pay the bills first. So the first question here is from, got to pull this up. Yeah, I know that's not the best. All right, from Ashley Short. What's better? Miami not taking a knee or Florida throwing a shoe 20 yards down the field against LSU? That's a great question. My answer to that is Miami by a mile, or at least by every inch that shoe flew down the field. Miami by a lot, just because, I mean, that's just, the shoe thing was stupid and you know, illustrated a bit of a lack of discipline on the field or whatever, but that not taking a knee with 36 seconds left is like, that's a whole different level of stupid in that case. That just, yeah, I think when your rival reaches that level of stupidity, it's hard to get anything a whole lot better than that. All right, next one is from JZRL. I don't really know what that all means, but he Says, I have a philosophical or psychological question. Does Norvell's messaging of response work against a mentality of dominance? We know this team is at its best when their backs are against the wall, responding when things don't go their way. But then they have lapses in concentration once they do respond and get a lead on teams. This FSU team plays like they know they're dominant when they turn it on, but they still haven't turned the light on and kept it on. They go up 22-0 on Virginia Tech, and then when the score is 22-17, they turn the light on again and flex the dominance. Do we just accept that this is what this team is? That is a great question. Well, first of all, I don't think we have a choice but to accept that this is that whatever the team is what it's going to be, because none of us are. Well, I presume none of the coaches or players are actually listening, but I'll just presume none of us are actually in that locker room or on that field. So we really don't have a choice but to accept whatever the team is or what it's going to be this year. But in the spirit of the question, I don't think that that's what this team, that's sort of the maximum of what this team can be or will be this season. And I don't think that the emphasis on response works against the idea of dominance. I mean, we've seen Mike Norvell teams dominate before. I mean, he preached dominance last year, and that's a team that ran off a string of 30-plus point victories against overwhelmed, outmanned teams last year. So I don't think that's it. I do think that that this team still has to find its identity and figure out who they're going to be and what they are in order to really play at their maximum, to play at the level that they were able to play in the first quarter against Virginia Tech, for example, and sustain that longer. I think some of that is that. I also think one of the factors here is Florida State plays an awful lot of players, and they play them early and often. So I think one of the things that needs to be considered here is some of the inconsistency, I do think, is the result of just a lot of different players and different combinations of players being on the field and not entirely gelling together, or sometimes young players making mistakes, sometimes, just things not being entirely in sync with the guy next to you. And that's something that happens when you do get a lot of rotation. Now, of course, the benefit is they are playing a lot of people, which means you typically are going to stay healthier. You typically have guys stay happier, although we did just see Winston Wright go ahead and decide to leave the team. And honestly, I'm not that surprised there. He's a guy that got passed up on the depth chart and then got passed up again when Ja'Kai Douglas came. And, I can understand that it's really disappointing and frustrating for him as a player. And as a person, he came to Tallahassee before last season expecting to be the guy. And then, honestly, I don't think he would have been the guy even at that, because I do think that the tape suggested that Johnny Wilson was the best of the guys when they brought them in, and that's what I'd said at that time. But then, of course, the car accident changed everything, so that he was no longer really able to contribute. And then by the time he started getting healthy, first of all, he's still not quite what he was before the injury. And secondly, even if he was what he was before the injury, he's not better than Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, or Jaheim Bell, and is not going to play a whole lot over those guys in those roles. Again, I'm thinking of Jaheim Bell really as the slot receiver in the way that they're handling the offense, though he didn't play a bunch this last week due to getting dinged up. So, yeah, but in any case, getting back to the main point, I think playing that many players does help in terms of overall satisfaction, in terms of guys feeling like they're really playing like they should, making sure that they stay happy, and a lot of mouths to feed on this team. And actually, I do think one place where they could rotate more is at the wide receiver position. I think that's a place where I'd like to see some of the other guys get in there a little bit more once they do get up, especially. And rotating a little bit, but I do think they're trying to give Johnny and Keon a little bit more in the way of reps, but I do, and trying to gain, I think, some more comfort with and rhythm with Jordan Travis. So I understand doing that, but I think playing, some of the guys that are second and third on the depth chart a little bit more there wouldn't hurt. But again, that's going to impact how in rhythm you can be. And, they played a lot of combinations on the offensive line, some by necessity due to guys getting dinged up and injured, others just due to rotation. And, that impacts how much you gel or how fast you gel, how long it takes for guys to really get used to their roles and having that guy next to you instead of that guy. And then on defense, they're rotating 6, 7 defensive tackles. They're rotating 4 defensive ends and sometimes moving a defensive tackle out there. They're rotating 4 or 5 outside or different linebackers, playing a bunch of defensive backs. And sometimes you look out there and you're like, geez, like what happened? Why did they allow that? Oh, that's a freshman. Or, also defensively, they've had some of those guys have not played. You look at losing Dent at safety was a big loss and impacted some things there as well. So I think some of it is just personnel and carving out roles, and I think against better teams narrowing that rotation a little bit. But I don't have a problem with playing that many players and rotating that many players against the Virginia Techs of the world or whatnot. Even earlier, I mean, they were rotating those guys in when they were up 14 or 15, I guess. And, I think that's good for them. I think that's good for the team overall. I think they're going to continue to do that, but that does sometimes lead to just a little bit more inconsistency, and I think that's a factor. I think the other thing is that they've not quite figured out, like I said, their overall identity on both sides of the ball, and there's just a few hiccups there, and then just little execution things that they can clean up. And then that works forward. But trust me, Norvell is emphasizing dominance just as much as he's emphasizing response. You will hear him shout, dominate, these sorts of things. So it's not something I'm worried about, but it is worth bringing up and asking. Okay, the next question is from James. He says, some of the holes Benson had, I could have run through. Have we figured something out in the running game, or is VPI just bad at run stopping? That's a good question again. So I think it's a little bit of column A and a lot of column B. So I think looking at what you go back and you watch it again, Virginia Tech had some real issues with fitting the run. The second level, and we talked about this in the preview, those backers and those safeties had some issues fitting the correct hole a variety of times over the course of the season, and they had those same problems again. There were times where they were just, one guy got sealed inside and another guy's not quite in the proper gap, and it's just a wide open hole. And the thing about Benson is you get him moving forward with a little bit of daylight where he doesn't have to make a lot of moves or go laterally in space in order to find the daylight, and he might be the best running back in the country if you give him that space to start forward and with a little daylight. And they gave him more than a little. Once you get him in that open field and he's got a head of steam, look out. And so a little bit of the problem, or a lot of Virginia Tech not being good at stopping the run against a quality run game. But I do think that they found some things, or they returned to some things that have been Mike Norvell staples in the past. Specifically the G play, where you pull. So there are a couple different ways that they do it, but one of the ways it's just basically outside zone, but instead of everybody stepping, let's say it's outside zone right, instead of the right tackle and right guard trying to step right and get those reach blocks against the players that they're blocking, it turns into a pin and pull, where the right, let's say the right tackle again, the right tackle is actually pinning down on the defensive tackle on that side, so the guard doesn't have to make that reach block, and the tackle doesn't have to make the reach block on the end man because the guard is actually coming out and is going to go ahead and pull and get a better angle on that edge player. So it oftentimes results where you get a nice seam just in that gap. So you're going to get the down block from the tackle, and then you're going to get the G pull, and the G is going to go ahead and kick that guy out. And sometimes he'll, if they try to spill it, you just log him with the G. So either way, you either get the edge, or you get a nice seam between the down block and the puller. And that's a play that Mike Norvell, that's one of, if anything, I would say that play has been Norvell's most successful play going back all the way to Memphis. When Florida State or Memphis have gotten into a rut or gotten into difficult situations, they've gone back to that play more than once and had a lot of success on that over the years. I'd be interested in pulling numbers in terms of their actual success rate on that particular play. Wonder if that's actually accessible. But in any case, they went back to that, and that, by the way, is one of those plays that Norvell really likes to run a lot against odd fronts. And the way that Virginia Tech lined up at different points, it was almost an odd front look, even though they did have a fourth lineman. It was the way that they aligned was favorable to that. So some of that's just matchups in terms of what they're seeing up front to go to that. But that's basically Norvell's odd front killer is to use a lot of G, and then they also made some adjustments with their counter where they pulled the center rather than pulling the guard on a number of cases. So instead of pulling that backside guard and asking the center to block back on the 3 technique there, what they're doing is they're just letting the backside guard pivot. So he's going to take care of the 3 technique, and then the center is able to pull. And Maurice Smith is an athletic enough center to do that. And Norvell did that some back in 2018. Back at Memphis, where he used his center some pulling there, and that was really useful to have an athletic center. And Smith, when he's healthy, is athletic enough to do that. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw more of that moving forward, with just the way that teams have played FSU in against the counter, where they've really had that 3 technique chase that guard, that pulling guard, really hard and try to beat that center's block. And it's been a really tough block for them to get, and it's caused some stack up a little bit in the backfield. I wouldn't be surprised to see them do a little bit more CT and CH, counter and that sort of thing. So that is a little bit of I think a change that they made where they found something, maybe worked on that a little bit more in the bye. And I thought they handled their overall just outside zone and inside zone series just a little bit better as well. So a little bit of that, and a lot of Virginia Tech just not being very good running the football. So, or against the run, I should say. So a little bit of both, but a lot of just Virginia Tech not being very good there. All right. Next question. Dat Dude Bull asks, curious, do you think Jordan Travis is starting to get the bad habit of fading away on every throw? He looks so off balance. And then James also asked, Travis throwing off platform or kind of backing out when releasing. On the one hand, if I get a big dude barreling down on me, I'm probably doing exactly that too, and maybe it avoids possibly catastrophic hits. And I've heard pro quarterbacks saying in the NFL many times you're not throwing from the classic posture, but is it a looming problem? Okay, so I'm going to lump those questions together. And yeah, I think the first thing I want to emphasize is, so Dat Dude Bull, you said, do you think Travis is starting to get the bad habit of fading away on every throw? My answer to that is no, because this is not something that's starting. This is something that he's done for a while. And honestly, this is one of the things, and I've talked about this for a couple years now. I'm frustrated when I watch them do drills because I see them actually, I don't know whether this is something that they're actually coaching or whether it's just something that they're permitting in the drills in terms of allowing that kind of throwing motion. But I'm seeing more than just Jordan Travis doing it. Travis is the most exaggerated example, but this is something that's showing up in drills. I mean, you can go back to any of the drills from camp this year. You could go back to drills from camp last year. And you're going to see the same kind of fading away and kind of slashing across the body motion in drills. And that, to me, is a problem. Is it something where he's getting the bad habit of fading away on every throw? No, he's not getting it. He's developed that habit, and it's a habit that has been not only tolerated, but has been cultivated. And there's an old rule in coaching that you get what you tolerate, you get what you allow, and whether this is what they've actually been coaching or, in terms of instruction, or it's just been something that they've been tolerating and allowing to happen in the drills for the last couple of years, this is what it is. And like I said, this has been cultivated, and it's very frustrating to me as someone who has coached throwers a lot that I don't think it's a biomechanically sound way to throw the football. And the truth is, and again, I've been meaning to get I talked about this last year about doing a video where I explain this a little bit more as someone who's coached throwers, that biomechanically speaking, there are a couple flaws there that lead to stereotypical misses and inaccuracy. And I think this week, after this weekend's game, I think I'm going to need to to record that, because I'm getting more questions about this. I'll go ahead and do a recording showing exactly how that works. But there's a combination of factors here, just in brief, that all pair together to result in less than optimal accuracy and also less than optimal velocity. And that is when you have the lead hip open too early, so you're opening before you actually create the torque necessary, and then get the weight sort of rather than working forward through the throw, working more to the side or back, and then you pair that with the arm coming down and across, and then you combine that with the arm not getting fully extended at the elbow and from the shoulder through the elbow all the way to the tips of the fingers, you end up with, it's sort of a triad of bad things in terms of overall biomechanics that tend to result in balls that float a little bit, balls that will sail more often than not, but you're going to get sort of up-down inaccuracies more than anything else. And every so often you'll get one that will kind of work down and work across to the thrower's non-throwing side in terms of those misses. So a right-hander is going to go to the left-handed side. You're going to wind up getting that kind of miss. But mostly you're going to get balls that sail or go to the dirt, because the sequencing has to be just right for it to be accurate, and you're not going to be able to drive the ball down the field the way that you could if you fully extend the arm. And again, it's very similar to short arming it. When you see someone who shoots a basketball and they don't actually finish with the full extension of the arm through the elbow, but just a partial extension of the arm through the elbow, and then just a little bit of the flick with the wrist, that's not as consistent as if you get the full extension through the elbow. And it's a very similar kind of flaw when you see this with a thrower, and they're pairing that with the balance issues and some of those other things. So I do think that's one of the reasons that Jordan Travis has been less accurate overall as a thrower on some things than ideal, not just this year, but last year. There were times where he missed some very accessible throws just because the mechanics weren't 100% rock solid. That does not mean that Jordan Travis is not a very good quarterback. He's really, really good. But I'm criticizing from the standpoint of he could be even better with just a little bit cleaner mechanics on this. Okay, next question. This one is a little bit related. Dino Babers just said Jordan Travis would be the best quarterback Syracuse has played, but they just played Drake May. You've watched them both a lot. Is Travis really better than May? Well, the answer to that, in my opinion, is no. And honestly, look, Travis is really, really good. He is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And you look at a couple of the key reasons why. One is the threat that he presents with his legs is a huge factor. But the thing that he does best, and the most important thing that Travis has brought to the table for Florida State, is consistent decision making. This is a guy who has not turned the ball over. He doesn't turn it over. And when you don't turn it over and you've got a lot of playmakers, that in itself is a huge deal. And then you combine that with him being a pretty darn good deep ball thrower, And you've got a guy who can make big plays with both his arm and his legs and doesn't turn the ball over. That's a great combination. And that's why he's become a really quality quarterback. Is he, typically makes the right decision, gets his team into the right spots, manages the game really well, and then does that as a guy who's a big play threat with both legs and arm. But Drake May is different, man. Drake May is, if you're putting the quarterbacks in tiers this year in terms of not just NFL prospects, that's a whole different thing. I'm just talking about college here. If you're putting quarterbacks in tiers, there's still one tier that's above all the others. And you're going to have Caleb Williams and Drake May in that tier. You might put Michael Penix in there, but I don't think so. Talk about a guy that Florida State decided to pass on. But anyway, you might put Penix up there, but I don't think you do. I think it's Caleb Williams and Drake May in a tier by themselves there. And I'll be honest, if you put Drake May at quarterback at Florida State, I think Florida State becomes not just by a little, but by a lot, the national championship favorite. I think he's that good. And, I think he's a future franchise quarterback in the NFL. And, he's a guy that can make every throw and doesn't miss a whole lot. And, as a thrower, he's just a significantly more advanced player and more talented player than Travis is, just as a thrower in terms of making every throw. Now, Travis as a deep ball thrower is in the same league. He's a really good deep ball thrower. But it's on the other types of throws where I'm going to give May the advantage. And May, honestly, is about as good a runner on the whole as Travis. He's just not quite as fast when you have to turn on the jets. But May will get you, 25, 30 yards at a chunk once in a while, and really moves well. And also is a guy that has managed to maximize what he's getting out of what I think is a pretty weak offensive line for North Carolina this year. And, he's done this with a lot of pressure. He's another guy, both guys, super tough and willing to take contact. So yeah, this is not a knock on Travis, but I do think May is, if not the second, if not the best, I think is the second best quarterback in the country. And I think that set is a tier above everybody else. Now, Babers is doing what coaches do. And, the next guy is even better than the guy we just played. And Travis is so good that, you can defend him making the statement. But again, having watched both guys, if I were staging a draft of guys to at that position, if I were staging a quarterback draft in college football for just any offense, Drake May's, if not the first, he's the second off the board. So yeah, I don't think Babers is telling the truth there. Other thing too is I don't think May's supporting cast is anywhere near as talented, near as good as what Florida State has. They're not as good on the offensive line. They're not as good at wide receiver. They're not nearly as good at running back. And I don't think they're even as good at tight end, which is maybe their strongest position as a whole. They're a little deeper maybe, but Morlock and Bell I think are at least as good as North Carolina's tight ends. So I think May has a little bit less to work with, and again has put up crazy numbers this year anyway. All right, next one. This one's from Pensacola. Curious to hear your take on a more favorable matchup for FSU if it comes to that in the ACC championship game. UNC or Louisville. I think either would be highly entertaining for a casual fan. So my take on that is I would prefer, if I'm Florida State, if I'm Mike Norvell, I absolutely prefer to play Louisville over North Carolina in that game. And the reason is real simple. If I can avoid playing a franchise quarterback who could absolutely go nuclear and, get volcanic hot and put up 400 yards on just a series of ridiculous throws and escape the pocket and do all sorts of different things that just you can't defend, then I'm avoiding playing that guy. I think you're better than both teams. I think Florida State is the better team if they play either team. But between the two teams, if I'm Florida State, I feel a lot more comfortable that you can reliably predict kind of the level of play you're going to get from Syracuse, as opposed to the possibility that, Drake May just goes unconscious and, they score enough points to stick with you. Now, the flip side to that is I think Jeff Brom is one of the best offensive minds in the country, and he will scheme you up. He's going to get some guys open. He's going to find ways. I mean, you look at his record in matchups against more highly ranked teams. He's kind of the upset king the last few years, whether at Purdue or this year at Louisville. I mean, he does find ways to basically be a real threat for upsets. So that, if you're going to take the other angle, you feel like you can probably scheme up Gene Chizik and Mac Brown and all of them. You feel maybe more comfortable given your history. I mean, Mac Brown has never beaten Florida State. You feel maybe a little bit better about that one on that side, maybe. But if I'm thinking about that just in terms of the overall matchups, and that includes the coaching staffs, and I think North Carolina's offensive coaching staff this year is actually really good. I would not want to play the possibility of Drake May, because I think if you're North Carolina, Drake May, having that guy gives you a puncher's chance against anyone, because it's possible that regardless of the fact that you're just giving up, that you can't block him or anything else, he's just getting the ball out so fast and so accurately that it doesn't matter. And they've got a couple, with Tez Walker now being eligible, they've got a couple of game breakers outside, and that can get scary. So you try to avoid that team if you can. Now, that doesn't mean that you favor that Florida State should fear either one of them, or that I would favor either one over FSU. But in answer to that question, that's how I'd take it. All right. Next one is from Jay Street. Whenever you do your full rewatch, you'll likely see that a lot of the lack of production on both sides of the ball in the second quarter is spurred on by some just ridiculous officiating calls, most egregious being the personal foul call on Byron Turner on the AZ interception play and the phantom holding call on Roddick on JT's scramble for a first down. Yeah, you're not wrong. Going back and looking at some of these, that wasn't a hold on Roddick. Now, I understand why they called it. It's there were some indicators that you often look for that were sort of marginally there. So oftentimes you're going to get that called. But yeah, that was not a good call. And then the roughing call, I mean, it just didn't look great, but I mean, it was basically an as he was throwing hit, and that's when he was not high. I just think you don't call that, but at any rate, you had those. And then don't forget the pass interference call that was missed against Ja'Kai Douglas. You had another that was iffy. So yeah, there were definitely, this was a game where normally bad calls kind of balance themselves out. This was one where I didn't think they did so much, and I do think it impacted the overall flow of the game at that stage. So yeah, there's some truth to that. Nevertheless, I mean, even after that interception was called back due to the roughing, they still allowed Virginia Tech to just sort of march the ball down the field and gave up a bad gap. I mean, they had a little stunt on, and Peyton got greedy, looking for kind of got out of his gap and allowed the quarterback to get upfield. Just a few different things that happened where great teams overcome those kind of calls and find ways to shut the offense out anyway. So I think that's all true. That still doesn't matter when you're playing a team the level of Virginia Tech. You've got to be able to make up for that more. All right. This one's going to be the final question. Should FSU run more 11 personnel? This one's from Colby. Should FSU run more 11 personnel? Seems that the offense ran smoother with 11 and the run game operated more effectively. So I think this is very matchup dependent. So if you're talking about just having been more successful against Virginia Tech, where because Bell was out, they did run more 11 personnel, then yeah, they did have more overall success in the running game, but some of that was, as we talked about, because Virginia Tech is just not good at stopping the run. and because their backers were regularly in the wrong gaps. So I don't want to make too much of that. I think that's something you have to be careful about there. But I do think that this is very matchup dependent, and I think FSU needs to be very conscious of where their advantages lie against different teams. So there are some defenses that you do want to use 11 personnel in just because you feel like you're going to get less high quality personnel matched up with your guys. So if you feel like their nickel corner who's going to come in and play against, say, Destin Hill or Ja'Kai Douglas in the slot, can't stick with those guys in the slot, then maybe you play more 11 personnel. If you feel like their third linebacker is actually more of a problem, then going 12 personnel it makes more sense. If that gives you a better matchup, then that makes more sense. If you feel like their outside corners are just absolutely elite and are probably going to be able to match up better with your outside receivers than anybody else, then maybe you go 11 personnel a little bit more to open up the field a little bit for some of the inside passing game and all that. But if you feel like you have a major advantage at each outside receiver against their corners, and you want to force teams to play more one high and cover three, cover one type looks in order to get those one-on-ones on the outside, then you play more 12. So it really depends on what you're trying to get. So, in my view, you need to do a little bit of both. And the other thing is, you got to remember, it's not just about personnel, it's about formation. So you can go 12 personnel, get that third backer on the field, and still line up in an empty set. Put your running back outside, or just go, line up both of your tight ends as slot receivers, essentially. Both of those guys are athletic enough to do that. And I do think we'll see some of that more this year, because when you do that, when you spread it out a little bit with those guys wide, those guys are still blocking out there just like they would, but you are simplifying certain things in the box. You're going to get a lighter box. Some of those things in terms of the running game are going to be easier. Difference is, though, that you're going to get a little bit different coverage look, and sometimes it's not going to be as advantageous. You're not going to have as much space for your number one and your number two wide receivers outside, and that's where I think they feel their biggest advantage is coming into the year. I think if you had to ask what their identity was, or what it probably should be, it's that you've got two elite wide receivers that are very difficult to cover one-on-one, and you've got to let those guys win and let Jordan Travis distribute to those guys. I think that's what they're looking for, and they're trying to get bigger plays out of that than anything else. And then, the run game is kind of complementary out of that. So, you've got to find ways to create a run game to keep teams honest and make sure that they can't take those guys away. That's the thing. I think with a healthy Bell, you need to keep him on the field a little bit more and just continue to let him do his thing. He does need to be a little more consistent catching the ball than he has been this year, and I think if he is a little bit more consistent, some of those questions go away a little bit. Think about a couple of the drops that he's had. You're talking about potential touchdowns, big plays, and those change games. And there have been a couple drops from the tight ends that have been factors. So, yeah, I think this is one where if I'm Mike Norvell, I'm going very matchup oriented, depending on the personnel of the defense that I'm playing against. And I'm using a variety of different formations, whether compressing in order to get the matchups I want out wide, or spreading a little bit so that I can run between the tackles with a little bit lighter box. A variety of different things. I think they need to kind of mix and match a little bit to get the matchups that they want, not just drive to drive, but play in, play out. So answer to that is, I don't know that it needs to be more in terms of of going 11 personnel, going 11 personnel more often, but I do think they need to use their personnel more selectively, play in, play out, to make sure that they get the matchups and that they use the formations that maximize their benefit on a play in, play out basis. And sometimes that's going to be emptying the box a little bit so they can get some numbers in the running game. Sometimes that's going to be compressing a little bit and letting things stack up in the box so you can get the advantage out wide in the passing game. The latter, though, is going to require that Travis and those receivers really be on the same page and that he be really accurate the whole way through. All right, that'll do it for us here. As always, thanks everybody for listening. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm Doc Staples. Thanks for listening. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Louis Marquez of Keller Williams Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. And thanks also to all those supporters over at Patreon, where I post video analysis and field questions for the podcast. I am especially grateful to those above the Dynasty level. That is Andrew Garrett, Brian Leininger, Neil Cook, Casey Kidd, Chris Chartrand, Dave Blair, Hector Cartagena, Jack Horton, Jimmy Van, Jonathan Kennedy, Keith Cheney, Lee Caswell, Tyler Kashishke, Vince Calandra, and Bert Bertoldi. You all are far more generous than I deserve. I'm really grateful. Thanks to you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening and thanks for your support. I made this.